Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane helps Jack and Jabot fight Newman by double-crossing Victor? Victor Newman might be betrayed by Kane Ashby. Will Kane ultimately aid Jabot and Jack Abbott in their retaliation against Newman Enterprises? Kane, who clearly doesn't like being forced into this situation, is now being blackmailed by Victor. However, Amanda Sinclair is scheduled to make a comeback before the end of the week of August 25th to 29th, so depending on what she can do, her return might be revolutionary. Kane might assign Amanda to help him get out of this situation, which could entail exposing Victor's allegations on Colin Atkinson's last scam or possibly uncovering information to provoke a standoff over blackmail. In any event, Kane's most recent realization may also influence what happens next. Kane cancelled all of his takeover plans in Genoa City after he flashed back to Colin pressuring him to bury Aristotle Dumas permanently in the August 26th episode. With Phyllis Summers whispering in his ear and acting as the devil on his shoulder, it's feasible that Kane will change his mind. However, it's also feasible that Kane will see a sea change as a result of this. Since that's the kind of thing Lily Winters would support, maybe Kane's ideas would actually change and he would end up fighting for what's right. In order to manipulate Kane and get him to join forces against Jabot, Victor is using extortion. Perhaps Kane can change the situation and turn into a genuine ally of the Abbotts. Billy Abbott will inform Jack about the scheme when Kane provides him with updates on it. Is this the beginning of Kane's scheme to deceive Victor and foil any Newman scheme against Jabot? Adam Newman must be extremely concerned about this phony alliance with Kane and all the ways it could go wrong for a reason. The fact that Adam believes it will backfire suggests that's exactly what will occur. According to previews for The Young and the Restless, Victor might be taken aback by some of Kane's next maneuvers, so pay attention. Kane helps Jack and Jabot fight Newman by double-crossing Victor? Kane Ashby had never been a man who enjoyed being backed into a corner, and yet that was precisely where Victor Newman had maneuvered him, into a place where every breath felt like borrowed air and every choice felt rigged against him, where the great and powerful Victor dangled blackmail over his head like a sharpened guillotine ready to fall at any moment. But Kane, though haunted by past mistakes and scarred by the legacy of Colin Atkinson, was not a man without resources, nor was he incapable of fighting back in the shadows, and that quiet resistance was what began to take shape inside him the moment Amanda Sinclair reappeared in Genoa City, returning just in time for the week of August 25th to 29th, carrying with her the kind of intelligence, legal prowess, and razor-sharp determination that had the potential to change not only Kane's fate but the balance of power between Newman Enterprises and Jabot. Victor believed he had Kane bound to his will with the threats of exposing old cons and connecting him to Colin's last scam, but Kane was never one to simply bow his head. Instead, he began plotting, revisiting every flashback, every memory of his father's manipulation. Like the haunting moment when Colin pressured him to bury Aristotle Dumas permanently, memories that fueled his resentment toward being used as a pawn again. Though Kane had recently walked away from his own takeover schemes, telling himself that enough damage had been done, the whispers of Phyllis Summers started gnawing at him, her voice like a sly devil perched on his shoulder, reminding him that opportunity was born in chaos, that if he played his cards correctly he could not only shake Victor Newman but also reinvent himself as more than a disgraced Ashby burdened by old scandals. Phyllis's influence, mingled with Amanda's unexpected return, created a crossroads in Kane's mind. Either surrender to Victor's extortion and betray Jabot, or twist the board entirely and become an unlikely savior to the Abbotts by feeding them insider information and orchestrating a double cross. What complicated matters was Lily Winters, the one person whose approval or disapproval seemed to shape Kane's conscience more than anything else, because Lily, always the moral compass, would want Kane to fight for what was right, not out of vengeance but out of conviction. And Kane knew deep down that if he could frame his betrayal of Victor as a step toward redemption, then maybe, just maybe, he could win back some of the respect he had lost in her eyes. The trap Victor had set, designed to weaponize Kane against Jabot, became the very pressure point Kane could exploit, because with Amanda's legal strategies and Billy Abbott's suspicions aligning, Kane saw the perfect chance to slip classified details to Jack Abbott under the guise of loyalty to Newman. After all, what better way to convince Victor of his obedience than to go through the motions of betrayal while secretly feeding the Abbotts every strategic move in advance? Billy, who had his own complicated history with Kane, wasn't initially inclined to trust him, but when Kane began providing proof, documents, whispers of boardroom plans, intel from secret meetings, it was impossible to deny that this was more than a con. It was a full-scale attempt to sabotage Newman from within. Jack, ever the measured strategist, understood the stakes immediately. Kane was risking everything by walking this razor's edge, and the Abbotts could not afford to misplay his gamble, not when Adam Newman lurked in the shadows watching with suspicion, warning Victor that this so-called alliance with Kane was destined to backfire. Adam's paranoia was not without merit, for Kane had begun choreographing a dance of deception so intricate that even Victor might not see the knife poised to strike from behind, and every step closer to Jabot's camp reinforced the idea that Kane had found his true side in this war. But was Kane doing this purely for redemption, or was he still motivated by self-preservation, a desire to rid himself of Victor's leash at any cost? The answer may not have been clear even to him, yet as Amanda coached him on how to frame Colin's scams in court, how to weave a counter-narrative that could neutralize Victor's leverage, Kane's confidence grew, his spine straightened, and his resentment hardened into determination. He would not be a pawn. He would not be Victor's disposable puppet. Instead, he would flip the script, becoming the Abbotts' secret weapon. The very mole who could dismantle Newman's strike against Jabot from the inside. Billy, unable to resist the thrill of this covert partnership, promised Jack that they would monitor Kane carefully, using his updates as both a shield and a sword, and though neither Abbott fully trusted him, both knew that desperate times demanded unlikely allies. Meanwhile, Kane's nightly conversations with Amanda became his lifeline. She pushed him to think strategically, to remember that information was currency, that blackmail was only as strong as the secrets one could not afford to let see daylight. And Kane realized that by bringing certain truths to light, about Colin, about Victor's manipulations, he could neutralize the Newman threat altogether. Each move Kane made tightened the knot around Victor without the old man realizing it, and soon, whispers began to circulate. Kane was no longer Newman's obedient tool but perhaps something far more dangerous. Adam, watching this unfold, grew increasingly frantic, urging Victor to cut Kane loose before it was too late. But Victor, blinded by his own arrogance and convinced he could outplay anyone, scoffed at his son's warnings, believing he had Kane right where he wanted him. The irony, of course, was that it was Kane who had Victor where he wanted him, and every step deeper into this dangerous masquerade brought the Abbotts closer to seizing the upper hand. Kane's ultimate realization was this: for the first time in years, he was not just reacting to chaos but orchestrating it. And though the danger was immense, so too was the possibility of redemption, because if he could be the one to help Jack Abbott dismantle a Newman assault, he would not only settle old scores but also carve out a new legacy for himself in Genoa City, one not defined by cons and blackmail but by courage and cunning. And so the stage was set. Kane Ashby, the man Victor thought he could control, was quietly transforming into the double agent who might deliver the greatest shock of all. And when the final confrontation arrived, when the smoke cleared, Victor Newman would not just be betrayed, he would be blindsided by the very man he underestimated most. Kane's decision to turn against Victor was not born out of a single moment of courage but out of layers of frustration, calculation, and the relentless pressure of living in someone else's shadow. And as the days crept forward into the end of August, the tension in Genoa City thickened like storm clouds waiting to burst. Kane knew that betraying Victor Newman was not a risk lightly taken. No one crossed Victor without consequence, but the alternative was worse, a life lived in permanent servitude. To a man who thrived on control, manipulation, and crushing the independence of others. Amanda Sinclair, fresh back in town, sensed Kane's desperation immediately, and she played her role as confidant and strategist with precision, reminding him during late-night meetings at the Grand Phoenix that leverage wasn't just about what Victor had on him, but also about what Kane could weaponize in return. Colin Atkinson's scams were messy, yes, but they were layered with international dealings, financial shell games, and enough buried bodies to cast doubt on any clean narrative Victor tried to spin. Victor wants you to believe he holds all the cards, Amanda warned, sliding folders across the table to Kane one evening. But what he doesn't see is that his hand is weaker than it looks. All we need is one crack, one mistake, and we can flip this. Kane leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in, realizing that for once he had an ally who saw through the myth of Victor's invincibility. Meanwhile, Victor was pressing forward with his plan to use Cain as a blunt instrument against Jabot, ordering him to siphon intel, leak boardroom strategies, and manipulate Jack Abbott's trust, but Cain played the dutiful soldier on the surface, nodding, taking notes, and promising loyalty while internally memorizing every detail to feed directly to Jack. His first quiet meeting with Jack and Billy at society was tense, almost hostile, with Billy scoffing openly at Cain's supposed change of heart. "You expect us to believe you're suddenly wearing a white hat?" Billy sneered, swirling his drink. "Last I checked, you were always out for yourself." Cain, biting back his irritation, dropped a flash drive onto the table, its metallic click echoing like a gunshot. "This," he said evenly, "is Victor's plan of attack, financial sabotage, PR leaks, and a quiet buyout of key Jabot suppliers. You don't have to like me, but you need this if you want to survive." Jack, ever more measured than his brother, studied Cain's eyes for a long moment before finally reaching for the drive. "We'll verify it," Jack said carefully. "If it checks out, maybe we'll start to believe you're serious. But betray us," his voice hardened. "And Victor won't be your biggest problem. I will." Cain nodded, accepting the terms. He understood that trust wasn't given, it was earned, and he was prepared to earn it brick by brick. As Cain fed Jabot piece after piece of Victor's playbook, Amanda worked behind the scenes to craft a legal counterstrike, piecing together evidence that tied Victor's extortion directly to manipulations that could, if exposed, damage his reputation and possibly weaken his hold on Newman Enterprises. It wasn't enough to simply resist. Cain wanted to put Victor on the defensive, to make the man scramble for once, and Amanda's plan gave him a path. Still, Cain couldn't ignore the gnawing fear in his gut. Victor was cunning, ruthless, and relentless, and if he so much as sniffed betrayal, Cain's life, and the lives of those around him, could implode overnight. That fear became very real when Adam Newman began circling him like a shark, dropping veiled comments, lingering too long in conversations, and finally confronting him outright in the Newman offices. "You think my father doesn't see through you?" Adam asked with a half-smirk, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're not clever enough to outplay him, Cain. Hell, you're not clever enough to outplay me. You're going to slip, and when you do, I'll be there to crush you." Cain forced a cool smile in response, but his pulse raced. Adam was dangerous, maybe even more dangerous than Victor, because he thrived on chaos and suspicion. It meant Cain had to move faster, feeding Jack more intel, staging fake loyalty displays for Victor, and staying 2 steps ahead of Adam's probing eyes. Phyllis Summers, never one to miss an opportunity, inserted herself into the drama with relish, whispering in Cain's ear whenever she could, telling him that aligning with Jabot against Newman wasn't just smart, it was transformative. "You've been living in the shadow of men like Victor and Colin your entire life," she taunted one night at Crimson Lights. "This is your chance to step out, to be your own man, to prove you're more than a pawn. Jack might not fully trust you, but if you deliver Newman to him on a silver platter, he'll have no choice but to see you as an ally. Think about it, Cain. Legacy. Respect. Power." Her words burned like fire, feeding his ambition, but also reminding him of the razor-thin line he walked. If he leaned too far into self-interest, he risked repeating his past mistakes, but if he leaned too far into moral redemption, he risked being too soft to survive the battlefield Victor had dragged him onto. The balance was excruciating, yet strangely exhilarating, and for the first time in years, Cain felt alive in the fight. The turning point came when Victor demanded Cain deliver a key piece of misinformation to Jack, an orchestrated lie designed to lure Jabot into a vulnerable financial move. Cain agreed outwardly, playing his part to perfection, but the moment he left Newman Towers, he went straight to Jack and handed over the truth. "This is the trap," Cain explained, laying out the documents. "If you act on the information he wants me to give you, Jabot will lose millions. But if you counter it correctly, you'll expose him instead." Jack stared at him for a long moment, the weight of what Cain was risking clear in his eyes. "You're putting yourself in the crosshairs," Jack said quietly. "Victor won't forgive this if he finds out." Cain's reply was steady, resolute. "Then he can come for me. I'm done being his puppet." For Jack, it was the first true sign that Cain wasn't just acting out of self-preservation. He was actively choosing to side with Jabot, and that choice began to shift the Abbotts' perception of him. Billy still grumbled, still doubted, but even he couldn't deny the results when Jabot's countermove hit Victor like a lightning strike, sending Newman's board scrambling to contain the damage. Adam, of course, noticed the pattern immediately and stormed into Victor's office, demanding that Kane be cut out before the rot spread further. "He's feeding them," Adam shouted, his frustration boiling over. "Every move we make, Jabot's ready for it. That's not luck, it's Kane. He's playing you, and you're too arrogant to see it." Victor, calm as ever, dismissed his son's fury with a wave of his hand, but privately, doubt began to gnaw at him. He started testing Kane with smaller tasks, setting up minor traps to gauge his loyalty, and while Kane passed them all with careful precision, Victor's instincts whispered that something wasn't adding up. The danger tightened around Kane like a noose, and Amanda urged him to consider an exit strategy. "The longer you stay in this double game, the higher the risk," she warned. But Kane wasn't ready to quit, not when he was so close to tipping the scales. "I've lived my whole life letting men like Victor and Colin dictate my fate," Kane said. "Not this time. I finish this." The climax of Kane's gambit arrived during a high-stakes board meeting in which Victor intended to unveil a coup against Jabot, a move that would cement Newman's dominance and humiliate Jack in front of the business world. Kane, working through Amanda and Jack, had already funneled the details of the scheme to Jabot, allowing them to prepare a devastating counterstrike. As Victor laid out his grand plan, confident and commanding, Jack interrupted with evidence, screenshots, financial documents, legal briefs, all of it tracing back not to Jabot's supposed weakness but to Newman's manipulation. The room buzzed with shock, and for the first time, Victor's mask slipped, if only slightly, as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. Across the table, Kane sat quietly, his expression unreadable, but inside he felt a surge of vindication. The betrayal was complete, the double cross executed flawlessly. The fallout was immediate. Newman's stock took a hit, the board questioned Victor's judgment, and whispers spread that perhaps the great Victor Newman was not as untouchable as he once seemed. Adam, seething, promised retribution, vowing to uncover Kane's treachery and burn him for it. Victor, however, remained eerily silent, his eyes cold as steel whenever they landed on Kane, as though already plotting his counterstrike. Kane knew the war was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning, but for the moment, he had shifted the balance of power, aligning himself with Jack Abbott in a way that could reshape Genoa City's corporate battlefield. Phyllis congratulated him with a sly smile. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief that her strategies had worked, and even Billy, begrudgingly, admitted that Kane had delivered when it mattered most. But Kane himself remained cautious. Victories against Victor Newman were never final, only temporary reprieves before the next onslaught. Still, as he left the boardroom that day, walking out into the humid Genoa City evening, Kane felt a rare sense of clarity. He was no longer anyone's pawn, not Victor's, not Colin's, not even his own fears. For the first time, he was writing his own script, and whatever came next, he would face it not as a man being controlled, but as a man who had finally taken control. If Kane thought for even a second that delivering Newman a crippling blow meant he could breathe easy, he was wrong, because Victor Newman was not the kind of man who let betrayal slide, and the silence with which Victor absorbed his humiliation at the board meeting was more terrifying than an explosion of rage. Victor said nothing, did nothing, just watched, his cold eyes burning into Kane as if carving a warning into his soul. And that silence lingered in the days that followed, stretching across Genoa City like a storm cloud that everyone could feel but no one could predict when it would break. Jack Abbott, ever the pragmatist, cautioned Kane that their victory was temporary at best, that Victor would regroup and strike back harder than ever. And even Billy, despite his skepticism about trusting Kane, admitted he was worried. Worried not for Kane himself, but for the collateral damage Victor would inevitably inflict on anyone standing too close to him. Amanda urged Kane to prepare, to build a defense not just in the courts but in the court of public opinion, reminding him that Victor's greatest weapon wasn't just raw power but the ability to shape narratives, to turn allies into enemies with a whisper.